Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Spotlight Dialogue with Roland and I. We'll be reaching you from Nairobi, Kenya. A very good evening to our Malaysian audience and all others joining us from around the world. I'll be your host for this session on planting future forests. My name is Talanya Burabao. I lived in Malaysia for a while when I was doing my doctorate at APU. So I'm pleased to be able to do this with you today. I'm also a postdoc research fellow at ISUC, that's the Integrated Sustainability and Urban Creativity Center, which has been bringing you this podcast series. So this one we have here today is the seventh of the series. So just to ease everyone into our discussion today, we know about the changing climate. Since we're in Sub-Saharan Africa, allow us to give you our context, but there's a lot that will apply to your contexts as well. Most of the population in Sub-Saharan Africa still lives in rural areas, and these people are mostly farmers. And we know farmers are among the first to feel the impacts of climate change, and that's farmers everywhere in a very direct way. So this is their livelihood. We have droughts, flood, locust invasions even in East Africa, and this means that access to food is at risk, and they're also not able to make money. So this is where agroecology as a solution comes in. It's bringing nature, natural systems, and ecosystems thinking, and agriculture, bringing these together. And we'll be talking about this today, how we can mimic nature as we go about farming. And the trick, as our guest Roland will share with us, is to bring them together not only to farm in an eco-conscious way, but to literally bring the trees into our farms. We know this generally as agroforestry, but Roland will share a bit more on a practice that's even more impressive and promotes high yields. So a bit about Roland. He's Dutch. has always had a curiosity about nature and cultural diversity. He has taught in primary school and has worked in the music industry back in the 1990s. He got involved in the organic farm industry as a manager for what later became the very first organic supermarket in the Netherlands. On the side, he studied natural healing techniques. So later on, he got into permaculture. This is one of the agroecological practices. And in 2015, he moved to the Caribbean to research how permaculture could change arid landscapes. With zero budget, he established a food forest around his house and started to give workshops. In 2018, he was personally asked by the Minister of Agriculture, that's Susie Carmelia Roma, to build up a few permaculture plots for educational purposes. And then later on, he organized an intensive course on Syntropic Agroforestry. And in October 2020, he came to Kenya. This was to research the need for to implement agroforestry systems, and the rest he'll share with us. So, takeaway is that he's convinced that Xentropic Agroforestry will solve most of our fundamental crises. So, before I give away too much, I'd like to give you a moment to introduce yourself. Roland, hi, how are you?
Hello, Stella. I'm fine. You gave away the most of it already. that's that's okay. That's okay. So you I think you summed up my story very well. So let's just start with the topic. Yeah.
Okay, great. So as we begin, feel free to send in your questions or comments. Roland loves questions. So let's start by setting the scene. We have industrialized farming where people
Mm.
use toxic fertilizers and pesticides. We know how this degrades the soil, and that's why we're looking into agroecology, agroforestry. So now you've made Syntropic Agroforestry your personal mission. So help us understand what it is, um, and in relation to climate change, how does it help?
Well, I hope I have enough time to explain everything. You can hear me? Okay, because I didn't hear myself anymore. Okay. Um, Yes, Syntropic Agroforestry is of course agroforestry, but I think it's the next level agroforestry to call it that way. For it takes in account the natural processes that occur in nature too. And to our understanding, nature is always moving from scarcity to abundance, from simple to complex, from entropy to syntropy, as we say. Syntropy
Mhm,
you can understand as an accumulation of energy, of solar energy, of nutrients, of plants,
mhm,
trees, of harvest, everything, soil biology. So we acknowledge that that's a natural pattern. So we imitate nature by trying to implement those principles on our farms. That's very short what Syntropic agroforestry does. So we mimic nature, we mimic living forests, and why we want to speed up that succession from scarcity. From Let me give an example. There's a desert somewhere. Maybe it's a desert by human design, because most deserts nowadays are created by uh, due to modern agriculture technology. So we got this situation. There's no nutrients in the soil anymore. The soil has been completely eroded. So we call that a situation of entropy. But in the somewhere in the consciousness of that system, there's the wish to reach to the states of abundance again, which is a natural forest, which might be a tropical rainforest for that matter. Let's focus on that the diversity between the difference between desert and a tropical rainforest. Both are in tropical climate zones, but
mhm,
the situation is completely different. So a tropical rainforest might end up in a desert, but also the desert might up in a tropical rainforest again. If we let
mhm,
nature, it will take maybe hundreds or maybe even thousands of years to reach from a desert again to the tropical rainforest. That's a long road, and we don't have the time. We need children to be fed, and also we have to deal with climate change. So we have to be moving on a faster pace. And that's where syntropic agroforestry comes in, because syntropic agroforestry allows you, by applying the same technology that nature uses, to speed up the processes, and we can end up with a forest in maybe 3 years already, 2 3 years. What you see behind me is a forest of 1 year only. That's a forest, and a food forest, but designed by us. So we can, and it is also in a complete arid zone, semi-arid zone. So, and this is not possible. So the syntropic agroforestry is about speeding up, accelerating the natural processes in nature by human intervention. Yeah. I can talk on, but
You
yeah,
you mentioned succession, and I
yeah,
know that that is a bit deeper into Syntropic Agroforestry. But
yes.
if you could summarize what that looks like, the actual process of setting up a syntropic farm or such.
Okay, okay. Maybe we start first with nature, because nature is our teacher. In nature, succession is the rule. So if there's, let me go back to the situation of a desert. Desert, sooner or later there will be some pioneering plants. They will colonize that place, not colonization from how the West colonized Africa, for instance, but colonization is to occupy an empty space. There's a huge difference in this case, because yeah, we all know what colonialism did. So I
Yeah.
won't I won't combine the two.
Good.
It's a
Yeah.
different process. So it's a process of occupying an empty space. So there's
Mhm.
this empty. So mostly what we see is that weeds are coming, or thorny plants, like acacia trees, but and some grasses and some what we plants that we call weeds. But they're only there temporary. So if we allow nature, then those things will be succeeded. Those plants, those pioneering plants, will be succeeded by different plants. That's how nature operates. So in our farm, we imitate those processes. We also imitate the process of succession. So it means that we plant the whole forest, the whole design of the forest of what we got in mind, the production of forest. We plant on one day, but we also make use of those successional stages. So we also plant grass, but we plant crops that will be succeeded by other crops, but they were planted on the same day. So I give you an example what we did in that farm behind me. We started with vegetables there, but the trees were already planted. So the papao trees you see there, but even there are the fruit trees behind me. There's moringa, as you can see there, are soursop trees. There is even jackfruit there, but they are small yet. But before that, those trees got that big. There was a successional harvest of the following items, which is radishes after 3 weeks. We got cucumbers after 4 or 5 weeks, and we got melons after 6 weeks. We got remember, it's planted at the same time, the same spot. So we planted about 50 seeds in 1 square meter, and then we got uh, maize, and we got okra. And after the maize and okra, we got eggplants, and from the eggplants we moved to the cassava, and from the cassava we moved to the stage where we're now in, the papaws and the papaya and the bananas. They will be producing for quite a few years. After that, the fruit trees will be big enough, and then they will start producing. So it's a continuous succession, as we see also in nature. But the good news is those vegetables we plant, they finance the forest. So reforestation becomes economically interesting for farmers now, because you harvest a lot of vegetables in the process of creating a forest. I think that will be like a paradigm shift for most people, because normally farmer is maybe taking away the forest to make place for a farm. Now they create forest to produce a lot of food. That's a complete paradigm shift. And it's not a complete strange paradigm shift, because our forefathers were farming that way. Most forms of agriculture in the tropical region were like creating food forests. I can even tell you a story about how when the Spanish arrived in South America, in Brazil for that matter, they saw the Indians, and they were thinking that the Indians were not practicing agriculture. But what they didn't notice, that the Indians were really the village of the Indians were literally, or I should say, the indigenous people of the South Americas. They were literally surrounded by fruit trees, and
Yes.
also in diverse successional stages. The only thing that they recognized as a kind of difference to what they saw is that they saw a lot of manioc, as they call it, cassava. And cassava is a plant that can only grow when it's planted by humans. So that should be giving them an indication of that they surely did agriculture, but they did agriculture not know as not in the shape and the form as they know it, as they perceived it. So the Indians were they considered the indigenous people as lazy because they were
Mhm.
not tilling the soil, and they were not sweating by by the sweat of their brows. Those are in the bread. They were just relaxing and having still an abundance of food. So the Spanish completely they couldn't understand what was going on there. So and Syntropic Agroforestry is getting back to those principles, but also put it more in a systematical way of thinking. So the forests are more organized like we recognize it in agriculture. That's why we call it also agroforestry. It's agriculture by mimicking forests. So we also work with raised beds. We work with lights. We work. We that's contains a lot of accumulated energy. So you can. Still, it is a forest behind me, but you can still recognize it as a farm. It's a
Mhm.
production of forest. Hmm.
You mentioned these indigenous communities, the
Yeah,
Indian communities, and these farms, let me call it a food forest that was
hmm,
around them,
yeah,
and foreigners thinking that they were lazy. And
yeah,
there's something about the syntropic forests that their management or maintenance is a lot easier once you've set them up.
yeah, yeah.
Please tell us a bit about that. Why is that the case?
I should first start with the implementation of the food forest because most people say when when I give courses, people I get often the reaction of people that they say, "Well, that's a lot of work." So in the beginning, it's a lot of work. But let's not forget about that. We have to imitate the forest, we have to mimic the
Mhm.
forest, we have to bring in all components of the forest before we start. But when we start, then the work slowly, gradually goes down. So it will go down to maybe to at least 6 hours a week or something maintenance. So that's very low energy input. Low energy input in case of labor. Also uh, fertilization and irrigation. So there's a lot of low energy input system, and yeah, the most work that we do is pruning. We prune the trees and we prune grass to accelerate growth and also to keep the system organized. So even weeds we prune. So
Mhm.
and we don't pull weeds out. We just prune them. So we see them as a form of biomass, voluntary biomass that are only temporarily in the system. So we don't battle against weeds. We don't fight them. We just prune them. We see them as a source of energy, and which they are in fact. Yeah,
Yeah, that sounds very weird. But I also know that this system keeps pests out. How,
uh,
I mean, yeah, how does that work? The idea for any, when you have a farm, the first thing you will see is a lot of other strange things coming to your farm. And
yeah.
yeah, how do you keep pests out?
Well, we first, we have different understanding of what a pest is, but let me say, a pest is originally something that happens in disbalanced situation. So, if you got a farm
Mm.
with monoculture, you are likely to get pests, especially when degrade your soils, because pests, in our understanding, is a sign of poverty, and the pests are there for a reason. They try to get your farm also in that stage of abundance. It's the same thing where we want to reach, but they point at us at our mistakes in our design. So we call pest agents for the optimization of life processes. That's very interesting because that we give them a very positive name by this. The reason why a pest can only attack a plant that is out of balance or that is diseased. So if you see a pest, know that your plant is diseased. And in most cases, the plant is diseased because it lacks nutrients. You can even measure this with a so-called Brix meter, you can see the lower the amount of sugars in the leaf material, the higher the chance of getting insects that will eat the leaves. So in our understanding, a pest comes because the plant gives signals that it's sick. So literally, if you translate it, the pests will come only when the plant's calling them. That might be
Mm,
a strange concept to a lot of farmers, but
yeah.
we believe it that way. Let me give you an example. In Curacao, the island I'm living in the Caribbean, it's a very semi-arid climate. The same place where you see that farm behind me. We used to produce a lot of lime because we got a national drink. It's called lime juice. And so there, all of a sudden there came a disease. That all those lime trees started to die because they got infected by a certain disease. And all the trees yeah, the same year all those trees died. So the production of lime completely stopped. And now you can blame the pests for it, but to our understanding, those lime trees were exposed to full sunlight, and no lime tree, and especially no citrus tree, likes to be exposed in full sunlight. And the sun is in the Curacao is real hot, so that was a real problem over there. And if we check the nature of the lime tree we consider it as a tree that needs a lot of shade. We call it a so-called low strata or medium strata. The most citrus are in the medium strata, but lime can even be in the low strata. It means that they can even grow in places where they only receive 20% of sunlight. They still prosper there. But they were planted in full spectrum of sunlight, so that means 100% of sunlight. They were literally screaming for help, and if the plant screams for help, then the pest comes. And how do those plants scream for help? They produce certain chemicals, and those chemicals, those attract the pest. So the pest will attack only diseased plants or plants that are not in the right space, according to our understanding. So instead of fighting against the pest, you also can say, "Hey, let's take their message. Don't ignore their messages because there's like an alarm bell. And also, if you try to kill the pest, then and the problem is not solved. So, for instance, if you kill the pest in the lime tree, and it's still standing in the full spectrum of sunlight, then then stronger pests might come to solve the problem because the problem has not been solved. So a pest always indicates a problem that we that we fail to see, that we didn't understand the root of the problem. So it's lesson material for us. A pest is like our teacher. It teaches us what went wrong in our design. And yeah, so if you know this character of pests, and also pests is mostly to be found in the first stages of the succession, so the colonizing stage and also the next stage, which we call the stage of accumulation. But as soon as the forest evolves more, you won't find too much pest anymore, and that's true because in that same system behind us, in the phase we had still maize there, we found that the rats came in to eat our maize. But now the rats are not there anymore because it's a balanced system. Maybe there are one or two rats there, but they're not forming a plague anymore. A plague is always due to disbalance in nature. There's also disbalance in our farm. So we should really accept that feedback that nature is always giving us. That's the most important thing, to accept the feedback nature is giving us, and pests are the best way to give that feedback to us.
Yeah. Um, so water is a big challenge, just like pests. I think access to water when you have a farm, a drought is a really
Mm,
scary scenario.
mm.
So how does this play out in Syntropic Agroforestry? These like water management. You've talked about soil management. Yeah, water specifically for people who don't have access to water.
Well, I think the Syntropic Agroforestry might be the solution for people in arid or semi-arid climate zones, because this farm you see behind me is also in a semi-arid zone. So most of the area around it at that time we took this picture was dried out. The even the leaves fall. We got a lot of acacia trees, like here in Kenya too. A lot of acacia trees, and when the climate is getting too dry, when they even drop their leaves. So you see like gray hills everywhere.
Yeah.
Uh, the thing is, to our understanding of Syntropic Agroforestry, the founder of agroforestry, Syntropic Agroforestry, said, you can plant water. You can literally plant water. The founder, his name is Ernst Gott, a gentleman that started the system in Brazil about 30 years ago. And how we should understand the nature of plants, because plants bring in water, because plants are also, they contain a lot of water, like our bodies also, we're mostly made up of water. Same with plants. So by bringing in plants, you automatically bring in water. And that's so. But when I got taught by my teachers, that those were teachers that also directly trained by Ernst Gotch, they were telling me that, most people think if you need to farm, you need water. No, it's different. If you need water, you need to farm. That's also paradigm shift. So you have to plant very densely, very densely. So the soil should always be covered by canopies, because the sunlight should never be able to touch the soil. That's one principle. So in the beginning, we start with a lot of mulch. We start with dead organic material or green organic material for that matter, and by keeping the soil covered, and then the plant canopy start to rise. And we plant in different layers. Even in the vegetables, we have considered different layers according to the demand of sunlight. So So as soon as the farms start be covered with canopies of plant, then something interesting happens, and that's due to the process of photosynthesis. We all learned that photosynthesis is a process in which makes plants make their own food, but we consider it as something more wide, because the carbon is been, will be transformed into carbon has been transformed into something else, into energy, sugar, and also as byproduct we get oxygen. So the heat of the sun and the heating up of the heating up factor of too much carbon is cooling down now because due to photosynthesis, and you literally can feel it. Touch a leaf in the middle of a hot day, touch a leaf and it feels cool. It always feels cool due to the process of photosynthesis. Now, can you imagine? If water starts evaporating, it will touch a cool surface. We all know what happens when water vapor touches a cool surface. It starts condensating. Condensating, that means that the water forms drops again. So that water falls down back to the soil again. So the water cannot escape anymore, especially when there's no wind anymore. That's another function of trees. When there's no wind, because the trees break the force of the wind and redirect the wind to the clouds, getting more the chances that there will be more rainfall because of the direct redirection of the wind. Then there's no evaporation because of wind anymore. And that's one of the biggest challenges in most arid zones, because not only the sunlight is also the exposure by wind. So that creates a lot of evaporation. But if you get those canopies, different canopies and layers, that means that the influence of the wind will be minimalized. And the wind will now have a cooling effect instead of a drying out effect. So that's nature. Nature does all those things. We learned about this by observing natural forest. The forest is always capable of organizing its own energy flows, especially water flows. So in the forest, I was in Kwale 2 weeks ago, and as we all know, the southern coastal part of Kenya has been plagued by a lot of droughts. So there was no real farming going on there, but we went in natural forest, an indigenous forest, and the forest was still thriving. No matter that there was no rainfall, the forest was still thriving because the forest doesn't depend necessarily on rainfall only. It depends on organic material, and as soon as you got a lot of organic material, then the water will be there also, especially in the soil. And the thing is, in most arid zones, due to changing of agriculture and also overgrazing, the amount of biogas went down from 60% of the original amount to less than 20% in 30 years later. So that's what the organic material, the biomass in the soil, that contains the water, that will keep the water there, that will store the water there. If there's no biomass in the soil anymore, there's no sponge like situation where the water can be obtained, where the water can be retained. So that's the problem. And as we start a farm, we immediately bring in a lot of biomass. We bring a lot of mulch. We bring in layers of organic material on top of the farm. So that's the first problem we tackled already. And if there's total no irrigation, because I have to be honest, this farm was irrigated because I should explain, go a little bit deeper in this because it's very important to understand. In this farm, we eventually started with irrigation daily, like everything, every farm in Curaçao. Our teachers were opposed against it. They say no, we shouldn't use irrigation because irrigation is an alien concept in Syntropic Agroforestry. But we said, yeah, but you don't know, you guys, you don't know Curacao. Our situation is too drastic. It's too. Brazil is like paradise compared to this,
Yeah.
even if it's deforested. So we started with drip irrigation and in Curacao, in order to grow anything, you need to irrigate with at least 4 liter water per square meter a day. But after a few months, we got some criticism because people say, "Yeah, you're still irrigating. You call it the plant. Let's plant water. But you're still irrigating. You're still fooling nature." And then our teachers, the Brazilian teachers, Tiago and Murilo, they said, drop the irrigation, stop with irrigation. We had like, don't do that. We cannot stop irrigation. Because the plants will die. They say, okay, start with 5 days. And we started with 5 days, and the plants still survived. They looked very healthy after 5 days. So they gradually built it up from 7 to 10 days, and we reached the period of 20 days. So 20 days without irrigation for banana trees. And you must know banana trees. If you don't irrigate the banana trees outside the rainy season for 3 days, then they start dying already in Curaçao. And that's a nice thing about Kenya. Here I found that the banana trees are surviving. They're not irrigated. So that's very nice. That's already an advancement. But anyhow,
Yeah.
so we were able to drop the irrigation rate from once a day to or twice a day to once in 20 days. That's a revolution. That was a complete revolution. That makes me convinced about Syntropic Agroforestry. Well, if you're not able to irrigate from the beginning, then you can start with planting a lot of biomass. You can maybe think of planting, so you don't think about crops in the first place, and that's quite a challenge because most farmers want to have crops, but now they're not able to grow crops also. So you have to start planting by plants that are very occupied to occupy the desert-like situation, the pioneering plants, the colonizing plants. Which plants are that? Like cactus, sisal. Sisal grows very well in dry climate of the coastal area, and that will collect the water for you. And eventually, when those cactus, I use kind of cactus, nopal cactus we call them, or prickly pear. That's a cactus without thorns, and they're not invasive, so they won't take over your farm. But we plant them very densely. They start collecting water because there's this one strange phenomenon going on with cactus. Even if there's no water, if there's no rainfall, a cactus blade is containing a lot of water, so they got the water
Yeah.
somewhere somehow. And that's the secret, if you so when the rainy season for that matter start, then we can start planting some crops between those cactus, and we use the blades, the leaves of the cactus as mulch. So the water of that in the cactus will slowly drip into the soil. So by that, you also follow the natural pattern by cactus first in the desert, later on some other plants. You follow that principle, but we speed it up because we planted that densely. We plant like a cactus every 20 centimeter, and in size also. And there, in between those lines of cactus, we plant our crops when there's a little bit of rainfall. So then, in that way, you create a situation that contains a lot of biomass. And as I always say, biomass equals water. Once you got biomass, you got water there, even if it doesn't rain. So the rainfall is nice, but we shouldn't depend on rainfall only. We should depend on other smaller cycles in nature.
Yeah. This is
Yeah.
true. What I like about this is we have many climate smart technologies that fail, especially in Africa for various reasons, but mostly finance. For
Mhm.
example, for water management, like building a dam is given as an option, but not many farmers have the money to go and build a dam.
Yeah.
So this feels really accessible. Like you said, a lot of effort and work goes in at first, and then later it becomes easy because it's really mimicking nature and allowing nature to work. And as for space requirements, I think you've mentioned that this is not, it could be a farm size. You do not need to have hectares and hectares. So we have rainforests that are quickly disappearing. We have, on the other hand, tree planting projects all over the world, even in arid areas to reclaim deserts, as you mentioned before. And so clearly the landscape is changing. And with agroforestry, we're bringing even more trees into our farms. So I'm curious what you think of this. Does it indicate what forests of the future would look like? And if you could paint this picture for us, it's a hypothetical, but yeah, if we
Sorry,
could.
there was a little bit noise in the background when you asked the question.
Oh, sorry,
The
I
core of the
will.
question.
Yeah,
Core of
the
your
question
question.
is, we have rainforests on one hand, and we have people moving forests or trees into their farms. And with deforestation, is this an indication of what forests of the future would look like? And in your own experience, what would be the hypothetical situation of what forests look like in the future?
Uh-huh. And that's a nice question.
Yeah.
I think, the if we only depend on reforestation projects, it might not be the solution for some reasons. Because once, if you plant only trees, it might not be the trees might not survive, especially in arid zones. It happens a lot of times. You plant a huge
Mhm.
amount of trees, but then when the cameras are away, when the press is away, then trees start dying because they should be irrigated. It's a real time problem. So it's very
Mhm.
trendy to plant trees. I agree, always agree that, but you should not thinking about planting trees. You should be thinking about planting ecosystems. Then the
Yes.
rate of trees that will survive are bigger. But these are always these kind of reforestation projects always depend on goodwill of people,
Mhm.
and they cost a lot of money. So and they don't bring back money to the community. So that might be there might be some trick in that. But if you create food forest, you might not create the same kind of forests that were there before, but you create a healthy ecosystem that produces food. So all of a sudden, it's in our interest too. So what I always say is that by Syntropic Agroforestry, the gap between economy and ecology has been bridged, because normally a lot of farmers, they look at trees as competing with their crops. Now you start to understand that those same trees are like bringing you advantage. They're bringing you a lot of money also. Even in the end, you can use them even as timber trees.
Yeah.
So that's is a kind of mind changing, game changing aspect of syntropic agroforestry. It's more than reforestation. So I think that if we really want to succeed in our attempts to reforestate the planet, we should turn to farming by applying trees. We should turn to tropical agroforestry, because, to my understanding, it's the most efficient way to reforestate, and also the most fastest way, while the communities gaining from it. Can you imagine? Normally, people, they have to plant trees, and yeah, for what reason do we plant trees? If they don't see the purpose of trees, but
Mhm.
if you plan in a syntropic system, you will notice, you will find out the purpose of the trees very fast, because it gives you a lot of vegetables.
I think we have questions coming in, Roland.
Yeah.
If, yeah, I'm gonna take the first one. Um, what is the role of agroforestry in achieving socio-economic rural development for family farmers?
That's a very nice one, because I already briefly mentioned it about it,
Yeah.
because it's a form of reforestation which bring money back to the community. So that's a
Mhm.
very sound solution to me. So
Yes.
people all of a sudden make a living out of planting trees, out of creating forests, and they're making a living. They make a very good living, because when they started in Brazil, mostly poor farmers started to apply this technology,
Mhm.
and before they used the technique of slash and burn, because slash and burn, they burn down the piece of the forest and they plant. So they were the enemies of the forest at that time. Because not saying that the traditional slash and burn was a bad thing, but this tradition, I must go into deeper to make the understanding complete.
Yeah.
Traditionally, slash and burn was only practiced once in the 3 years. So you burn down, you farm only 3 years on it, and then you leave the forest to come back for at least 7 years. So that means only after 10 years you can go there, plant again, burn the forest again. So in that time the forest was already recovered. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but now they didn't. They even stopped practicing slash and burn because now they see that by planting a syntropic agroforest, they already start making money in the first month. That's something unheard. And instead of normally when you plant your crops, you harvest, you have to go into the land again, till again. You have to wait again until the crop is getting ready. So there's a lot of waiting time. But now you harvest continuously in the succession, as I mentioned. But that
Yeah.
means that it's very economically. So you have more harvest per square meter of different kind of crops, not necessarily the same crops, but more different kind of crops which you can bring to the market. So you earn your living by, as a poor farmer, you have more income now than when you practice monocropping, because monocrop is like, let's say, eggplants. If your cash crop is eggplants, you wait for a few months before they start producing. They start producing maybe for a year. Let's put it like that. So after that year, you have to open up the field again, plow again, and wait for another 5 months before they start producing again. That's a waste of time. So now they don't have that energy input anymore, but they still make money by different crops. That's a very interesting perspective for poor people. So especially poor people are now all of a sudden turned into protectors of their food forest or maintainers of their food forest. So that's again a mind shift. This is a new paradigm shift, and that's what I like. It's because you can tell people, hey, you shouldn't burn a forest, you shouldn't burn charcoal, but the gas prices going up. What they should do then? It's easy to dictate to people what people should do, but if they make a profit out of it, all of a sudden the ball game changes.
Yeah.
That's what I like about Syntropic Agroforestry. You don't have to push people into Syntropic Agroforestry. You just let them, show them how it works, and they will eventually embrace it themselves because of economical reasons. They become like the caretakers of the forest now. That's beautiful. To me, that's
Mhm.
beautiful.
Yeah. Giving power back to the people. We
Exactly.
have another question. What exactly are the main blockers hindering this form of farming from achieving full autonomy and resilience currently? Because the potential of this seems promising, but is not very well known. You
Uh,
must
I
get this
think
question a lot.
I think the main blockage is the ignorance, not knowing that it exists and how it
Mhm.
works. Because I
Mhm.
did gave a lot of courses in Kenya, and once people see it, they cannot unsee it anymore. That's the thing.
Mhm.
Uh, so it must be. I think it should be broadcast on a wider scale. On the other hand, I believe that once farmers see it, they will start practicing it. That's what I learned here in Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda so far.
Mhm.
So I got good hopes that it will be, but the blockage is ignorance. It's not knowing that it exists. So it's being caught up in traditional thinking about farming, not traditional but conventional. I should say
Yeah.
conventional
Mhm.
forms of farming. Yeah. So
Um,
and
mhm.
achieving full autonomy, that you have a very small piece of land with a lot of harvests, and so that will give you more autonomy than even if you got a big farm and you plant only one crop on it, because that's also a lot of energy that you should put in, a lot of labor, a lot of water, a
Yeah.
lot of irrigation. Now you have this very small plot that produces abundantly, but that's also giving you autonomy in a faster rate than if you just a traditional farmer or a conventional farmer, for that matter.
Mhm. Yeah. Another question. I would say this is a skeptic. So we
Very good.
have, yeah, trees are excellent at taking carbon out of the atmosphere and trapping it in their trunks, roots, and leaves. But what if planting them wasn't the solution?
Ah. Yeah, there's some people they say that it's not a solution because even the climate change is not real. Or some people say that. Um, I doubt it because because I can only talk from my own personal experience. I'm not a scientist, but standing outside my food forest, feel the burning heat of the sun. You
Yeah.
know, then I take one step into the forest and I feel the coolness of all those trees that's surrounding me. And
Hmm.
this and then so I tend to believe that the cooling down effect of the trees. So that's just an experience. It's not only by shade, because if you stand underneath a shade of concrete, it's not giving you the same coolness as if you stand on the shade of a tree, especially when it's a forest. So that's I won't go too deep in that discussion, because I will focus on all aspects of Syntropic Agroforestry. But to my understanding, it's carbon sequestrating, yeah.
Yeah.
And carbon
Um,
is then a source of energy, yeah. So
mhm.
we somehow we're doing something wrong, but we can change it and create it the other ways creating living systems. So that's maybe more in line of thinking. So the problem in this is then the solution. Only by
Yeah.
creating this system. If we don't do it, then we got a problem,
Hmm.
to my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. I would add that we like big nations and big corps as well, rich nations rather.
Mm,
Um, at COP, the Conference of Parties, often they give solutions. They say that they're going to plant trees, or they are hoping for technologies to come about that will sequester this carbon. But I just wanted to say that actually, right now, the best technology we have is trees, and that is has been proven. Most of these other technologies that they talk about are not actually in existence. So we
true.
bank on what we have, and nature is always true.
The thing
So the
is,
next,
let me give you a
yeah,
very interesting perspective concerning
yeah.
this.
Mhm.
According to Ernst Gotts, the founder of Syntropic Agroforestry, every civilization went down because of the destruction of the ecosystem that surrounded, or the ecosystem on which the civilization depended on. So we can just sit and wait till the civilization clash, or we can work on the solution. While building on the solution, can also earn some money, give people the power back, give people ways of making an income back in places where they now depend on rainfall.
This is
So
true.
the choice to me is easy.
Yeah. We have a question, another one. We have so many. We'll do our best to go through all of these, guys. So, which country eventually has the least amount of forest and are facing problems with it? I would start by saying sub-Sahara places that have deserts. I mean,
Yeah, maybe, maybe. I'm not completely known in these factors, but I think every country
yeah.
can make use of this kind of farming. That's what I know. But
Hmm.
of course,
Hmm.
those countries that have the most deserts and less tree cover, they will uh, uh, prosper the most of it. By
Yeah.
it. So, but it's not. Oh, there's one thing that you should understand. I'm not arguing that in a typical savanna climate you should be planting forests, because the savanna climate is also a natural climate. But maybe there's another technology there. But
Hmm.
we all know that we lost a lot of forests, and those forests were turned into farmland, and they were degraded sooner or later in history. So we can
Yeah.
turn those lands back into forests, not necessarily a natural savanna, but So we must look at the natural situation of how it was before. That wouldn't,
Hmm.
but even though if you're planting a system in a savanna, it's still better than not planting traditionally or conventionally, because then you rob from the surroundings. You rob
Yeah.
from nature. You rob your resources because you bringing water that will evaporate again, won't
Hmm.
recycle. You're bringing fertilizers that won't do good to the crop, but only degrade the soil in a faster speed. So synthetic
Yeah.
agriculture to me is always good. regardless the country where we are.
Mhm. Um, we have, well, let me read this one. How much do we need to replant that is enough to recover the amount of trees we've lost? Do you think we lost more forest than before when the idea of reforestation wasn't realized much than now? Have we lost more forest now that
I
there's
just,
reforestation?
to be honest, before the event in this meeting, I googled the amount of forest we're losing on a year basis, and it's like 10
Uh-huh.
million hectares. 10 million
Mm,
hectares a year base. So we're losing forest. Yeah, we're losing
yeah.
forest. So there's no time to lose. There's no time to lose concerning the droughts that are and the droughts and the floodings that are plaguing us, and there's no time to lose concerning the amount of trees we're losing. So we have to
Mm,
make reforestation economically sound to people. That the planting a forest must be more something to achieve than cutting a forest. You should make more money with planting forest than by cutting forest. That is, to my understanding, the most beneficial solution to this problem. Because otherwise, we keep on
mm,
losing. But I'm not
mhm.
focusing too much on the loss. I'm focused more on what we can achieve because I don't want to
Yeah.
be depressed. I rather work on the other side. Yeah, we got a solution.
Um, so another one, activists are increasingly suing governments and companies to take action against climate
Uh,
change and winning. Could
mm.
this be a turning point?
Yeah, but I got my doubts. I'm not. I'm
Mhm.
always supporting those activists. Because they at least they got a feeling. They got their heart on the right place. But
Yeah.
I don't personally. I don't wouldn't depend too much on the big power game. The power forces because you're backing something that's not in their agenda. But if
Mhm.
you can make it, and I give you an example that can also be different, because I came from an island, Curacao, in which the minister you see here now right behind me of agriculture was really behind us. She really
Yeah.
saw the idea, she saw the efficiency of it, she saw the good, economically good also of it. So she really supported us. So that can be possible
Mhm.
also, but you have to bring in an alternative. You cannot demand something from governments and don't bring in an alternative. That's my personal take on it. So I always support you, but we also got the solution. So why not start farming in your own? We created here a very small farm in Nairobi, in the midst of concrete, midst of
Mhm.
buildings. We could turn empty spaces in cities to create these kind of farms too. So we can
Yeah.
do a lot also because if we depend on the big guys on top, then we always feel depressed and we feel a lot of anger. But this anger can also be channeled into something positive,
Mhm.
because anger is an energy, and energy is like energy needs to be succeeded, needs to be transformed, needs to be
Mhm.
reach the state of centropy also.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it looks like we have a responsibility here, all of us.
yeah.
Yeah, and there are many people already involved in planting these future forests. But where would someone like me, for example, someone watching this, we grew up in the city, not really lived in a farm, um, haven't worked with soil, but want to participate, talk to us because these forests need to be planted today, as you're saying, we should channel our energies into that.
I remember when I was doing my permaculture design course. I also did my permaculture design course. And the one thing that stuck into my mind, it was they say that the future of farming will be in the cities, not in the rural part, in the urban. Urban farming will be the solution, because urban farming, if you farm in a city, you're very close to your clients. So the transport is all of a sudden out of the equation. So you don't lose energy by transporting it from far to all over the country to bring it to a certain place. That will be interesting. And also there are a lot of spots that can be used for farming which we don't recognize as such. You can even plant in sacks. You can plant in containers. You can plant anywhere.
Mhm.
So, but y- I think if you apply certain technologies that nature does also, then you're more advanced because then you can deal with your pests and your weeds and your diseases on a better way than if you don't apply those technologies. So I
Mhm.
believe in urban farming. I really believe in it. For that matter, you can check my YouTube channel. There's some video updates about the urban farm we established in Nairobi. It's really literally inside the concrete, and it's producing very well, very good. And
Yeah,
so you
that's
can
Facebook
choose.
with your name, right? Roland
Yeah,
van
that's
Reenen.
YouTube with my name.
Oh, sorry. What's the
Like
YouTube account?
Roland van Reenen, and my same
Okay.
name. Yeah.
Okay. So I wouldn't be doing myself justice if I didn't ask about to look at this through a gender lens. So what does this look like at the grassroots with the people that you work with? Are women and men participating equally? Are they benefiting equally? Are they feeling
Um,
equally? Yeah,
I
what does
think
that look like?
I think the rate of the gender balance is now like 60% of men and 40% of women,
Mm-hmm,
and so I think there's some work to be done there. So
mm-hmm,
because if you teach a woman, you teach a nation. If you teach a man, you just teach a man. Sorry to say, but
mm-hmm.
if you teach a woman, you teach a nation. So we depend more on women.
Yeah.
And also, if a woman is able to bring the money in the household, then that's a kind of emancipatory factor. We shouldn't
Mm-hmm,
uh, we shouldn't underestimate. Yeah. So to my understanding, we should have more women. But I
yeah.
already say, it's quite a number because the situation can be worse. When I was in Uganda, we had a situation there was only one woman
Uh,
and like 30 men. So that was a real gender disbalance. But yeah,
yeah.
I think the women are coming up also, hopefully, because
Mm-hmm,
in order to achieve prosperity for a nation, the women should be included. That's something we can learn from the if we combine if we see the difference between poorer countries and richer countries. The higher the rate of emancipation, the more prosperity mostly. So that's
mm-hmm.
what I understood of it. Yeah.
Yes, we have a question from it's to do with, okay, to convert traditional irrigation to modern irrigation, and what kind of irrigation should we use? We have 20% saline water, salt water, depending on the amount of sunshine and salinity of water and soil. It's a really long question, but
Yeah.
try to, yeah.
The thing is, in Curacao we got the kind of same situation. We depend
Mhm,
on deep wells. Normally we depend on deep wells to do any form of agriculture. Or you can nowadays you can also buy water, but it can be too
mhm,
costly. But the thing is, we're surrounded by the Caribbean Sea. So if the groundwater level is lowering, and it does lower, then
mhm.
the risk of getting saltwater infiltration is bigger. So you start irrigating with salt water, and we all know that if you do that for a long period, then the soil will be completely unuseful for
Yeah.
crops as well. So that's like putting this clock backwards to entropy. So that's not the solution. So
Mhm,
I think we should focus not only on the irrigation, but we should focus more on water harvesting. And that's
mhm,
maybe something I got from permaculture. Did you consider roof harvesting? Because if you got like if you got a big roof of your house or your farm or just another schoolyard, maybe you can harvest a
mhm.
lot of water. You should calculate the amount of water that falls down on a year basis per square meter, and there you got your amount of water you can harvest on a square meter,
Yeah.
and that can be quite a lot, and that water is safe to use. So that's also one thing. And
Mhm,
also, what about the if you implement an ecosystem? An ecosystem will gather water for by itself. So maybe it's a slow process, like I already mentioned before, by planting those cactus and those sisals, the agave plants. By But you
Yeah.
can reach there. As soon as you got an ecosystem, the water starts circulating in that system. That's a promise, because I've seen it so many times, so many times.
Mhm.
I speak from experience. But I always tell my students, don't believe me, try it out for yourself. Don't believe me, just do it yourself. Then you get convinced, not by following a live stream like this. You should be
Yeah,
putting your hand in the soil and start doing it, building a food forest. Yeah.
that's true. Yeah. So we're gonna wrap up now, Roland. Top
I
of the
think
hour.
so. Do
Yeah,
you
I
see there's
believe.
our
Yeah, I believe we've shared a lot, and I believe we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot. Um, what I liked about this conversation is that the solution to our environmental problems seems extremely accessible. Like anyone, anywhere can do this. Urban, rural, a lot of money, a little money, space, no space. These are the kinds of solutions that are also easy to scale because anybody, anywhere can adopt it. So as we wrap up, it's been a pleasure to have you, Roland. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
and to our tech support in the back, everyone who's made this possible, thank you. To everyone watching, thank you for joining us today. This is our last episode of the Spotlight Dialogue for 2021. So, from all of us, we'd like to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. We'll see you next year.